So my goal for today was to explore an ancient city. Oh my god! No. But that did not go very well. Just do it. Get it over with. So instead today I'm going to be finishing up my bridge build. While we're doing that, I've got some pretty scary Reddit stories to read. The first story today is from r/horror stories from user Gamal Frank. I work as a morgue doctor. Our janitor can stop a family's grief in 2 minutes, but his price is horrifying. I'm a medical doctor, specifically a forensic pathologist. A few months ago, I landed my first official position at a large county morgue. After years of medical school, residency, and brutal hours, I finally had a steady job with a clear routine. The work's not glamorous, but it's necessary. I examine the deceased, determine the cause of death, and prepare the reports. It's quiet, methodical work, which is exactly what I wanted. The facility itself is located in the basement level of a massive hospital complex. It's a sterile, cold environment filled with stainless steel tables, bright fluorescent lights, and the constant, heavy smell of chemical cleaners and formaldehyde. There are only 3 of us who work down here during the day: the senior medical examiner, myself, and the janitor. The senior examiner is a quiet woman who spends most of her time in her office reviewing files. We barely speak unless it's about a specific case. That leaves the janitor. He's an old man, his skin is deeply wrinkled, resembling weathered leather, and his posture is severely hunched. He wears a standard gray maintenance uniform that always looks slightly too large for his thin frame. He moves slowly, dragging a mop bucket down the long, tiled hallways, keeping entirely to himself. He never speaks to me or the senior examiner. He just does his job, cleaning the floors, wiping down the stainless steel tables after we finished our examinations, and emptying the biohazard bins. I thought he was just a quiet, isolated man working a miserable job, but within my first 3 weeks, I started to notice a pattern. The morgue has a small viewing room. It's a space where families are brought to identify the bodies of their loved ones, or to spend a few final moments with them before they're transported to a funeral home. It is, without a doubt, the heaviest room in the building. As a doctor, you learn to detach yourself from the emotional weight of death, but witnessing the raw, visceral grief of a mother or a husband in that viewing room never gets easier. People react to sudden death in terrible ways. They collapse on the floor. They scream until their vocal cords tear. They hyperventilate. They beg the doctors to tell them there's been a mistake. It's loud, chaotic, and deeply tragic. But I noticed something impossible happening whenever the old janitor was working near the viewing room. The first time I noticed it, we had received the body of a young man who had died in a motorcycle accident. His parents were brought down to the viewing room. Through the heavy wooden door, I could hear the mother sobbing hysterically. Her wails were echoing down the tiled hallway. It was the sound of a person breaking apart completely. I was standing near the reception desk, filling out paperwork, feeling that familiar knot of heavy pity in my stomach. The old janitor walked down the hallway, dragging his mop bucket. He stopped outside the viewing room door. He left his mop leaning against the wall and slowly pushed the door open. He stepped inside. I assumed he was just going in to empty the trash or clean a spill, completely oblivious to the grieving parents. I considered going in to pull him out and tell him to give the family some privacy. But less than 30 seconds after he entered the room, the screaming stopped. It did not taper off into quiet crying. It stopped entirely, as if a switch had been flipped. A minute later, the old janitor walked back out of the room, picked up his mop, and continued down the hall. Shortly after, the parents walked out of the viewing room. I braced myself to see their ruined faces, prepared to offer them water or a chair. But they didn't look ruined. The mother's face was dry. The father was holding her hand. They looked calm. They looked incredibly, deeply peaceful. It was a genuine, relaxed relief. They thanked the receptionist politely and walked out to the elevator. I stood there, completely confused. You don't recover from the sudden death of your child in 2 minutes. Over the next month, I watched this exact scenario play out dozens of times. A grieving family would arrive, broken and screaming. The janitor would slip into the room. A few moments later, he would leave, and the family would emerge in a state of profound, unnatural peace. I never heard what he said to them. I tried to stand near the door once, straining to listen, but all I could hear was a low, rhythmic whispering. It sounded like he was speaking a language I didn't understand, the syllables thick and harsh. Whatever he was doing, it was erasing their grief completely. I asked the senior examiner about it one afternoon. I asked her if she had ever noticed how the janitor interacts with the families. She didn't look up from her paperwork. She simply told me that the old man had been working in the morgue long before she started. She told me he had a gift for comforting the bereaved, and that I should leave him to his business. Her tone was sharp and final, making it clear the conversation was over. But the pattern with the families was not the only strange thing about the janitor. There was also the rule about the night shift. There's a very strict, unwritten rule in our facility. No one is allowed to stay in the morgue past 6 in the evening. The official explanation is that the hospital cuts the ventilation and power to the non-essential basement sectors to save money. But that's a lie. The power stays on. The real rule is simply that the medical staff must vacate the premises before nightfall. Only the janitor stays. He's the only person authorized to be in the morgue overnight. I learned how strictly this rule was enforced during my second month. We had a backlog of reports due to a large pileup on the highway. I decided to stay late at my desk to finish typing up the autopsy notes. I watched the senior examiner pack her bag at 5:30. She told me to make sure I left before 6. I nodded and kept trying. At exactly 6 o'clock, the door to my office swung open. The old janitor was standing in the hallway. He was holding his mop. He looked at me, his deep, dark eyes locking onto mine. "It's time for you to go," he said. His voice was incredibly deep. I told him I just needed another hour to finish my reports and that I would lock up when I was done. He did not argue. He simply stepped fully into my office, walked over to my desk, and reached down to the wall outlet. He pulled the power cord to my computer directly out of the socket. The screen went black, instantly deleting an hour of my unsaved work. I stood up, angry, prepared to yell at him, but when I looked at his face, the anger evaporated. His expression was completely blank, but there was a heavy, dangerous tension in his posture. He looked at me with a cold, predatory focus that made my skin crawl. "The work is done," he said slowly. "You leave now." I packed my bag in silence and walked to the elevator. He stood in the hallway and watched me until the doors closed. That incident planted a deep seed of suspicion in my mind. The unnatural comforting of the families, the rigid isolation at night, the strange behavior of the senior examiner. It all pointed to something deeply wrong happening in the basement of the hospital. I could not let it go. My scientific training demanded an explanation. I needed to know what the old man was doing when the doors were locked. Curiosity killed the cat, guys. I don't know. Maybe he's like reanimating the corpses or something in the basement. That's my guess. We'll see. The opportunity to find out came 3 days ago. We received the body of a young woman in the early afternoon. It was a tragic, sudden medical failure. Her family arrived shortly after. There was a large group of them, parents, siblings, a fiancé. The viewing room was filled with absolute agony. The wailing was so loud it penetrated the thick walls of the examination suites. I watched from the end of the hallway. The janitor, moving with his slow, dragging shuffle, pushed open the door to the viewing room and went inside. Less than a minute later, absolute silence fell over the room. The janitor walked out, picking up his mop. 5 minutes later, the large family emerged. They were holding each other, talking softly, wiping away a few lingering tears. But the teary, crushing despair was entirely gone. They looked relieved. They looked like a heavy physical weight had been lifted from their shoulders. I made my decision right there. I was going to find out what he was whispering, and I was going to find out why he had to be alone with the bodies at night. At 5:30, I packed my bag just like always. I said goodnight to the senior examiner and walked out the main hallway toward the elevators. But instead of pressing the button to go up to the lobby, I slipped through the heavy fire door leading to the old supply storage room. The storage room is filled with dusty boxes of outdated medical supplies, broken rolling chairs, and old filing cabinets. It hasn't been used in years. I squeezed behind a tall metal shelving unit, sat down on the cold floor, and waited. I checked my watch. 6 o'clock passed. I heard the distant sound of heavy main doors locking for the night. The hum of the daytime activity died down entirely, leaving the basement level in profound silence. The cold began to seep through my scrubs, making my joints ache. I listened closely for the sound of the mop bucket or the heavy dragging footsteps of the janitor. I heard nothing. Then a new sound broke the silence. It was a heavy, mechanical clanking, followed by the squeal of metal hinges. It was coming from the cold storage room, the room where we kept the large stainless steel refrigeration units that housed the bodies before and after examination. I stood up slowly, my legs stiff. I pushed the fire door open just a crack and peered out into the hallway. The main overhead fluorescent lights had been turned off. The only illumination came from the faint green emergency exit signs mounted above the doors. I slipped out of the storage room and walked silently down the tiled corridor. My heart was beating rapidly against my ribs. I felt a deep, instinctual warning telling me to turn around and find a way out of the building, but the need to know, the terrible curiosity pushed me forward. This guy would die first in a scary movie, and like a horror movie, it's always the curiosity that gets him. I reached the door to the cold storage room. It was slightly ajar. I pressed my back against the wall next to the doorframe and listened. I heard a wet, heavy tearing sound. It sounded like thick fabric being ripped apart by bare hands, mixed with a sickening, squelching noise. It was followed by a wet, rhythmic smacking sound. Someone was eating. I slowly leaned my head forward and looked through the gap in the door. The cold storage room was illuminated only by a small, internal light of one of the open refrigeration drawers. The drawer had been pulled all the way out. Lying on the metal tray was the body of the young woman who had been brought in that afternoon. Standing over the metal tray was the janitor. His pale, wrinkled back was facing me. He was leaning heavily over the body. Both of his arms were buried deep inside the abdominal cavity of the corpse. My medical training tried to process what I was seeing. He wasn't using a scalpel, or even using a bone saw or surgical retractors. The woman's chest had not been opened through a standard Y incision. The old man had simply forced his bare hands directly through the skin, muscle, and ribs. I watched in absolute paralyzing horror as his shoulders heaved backward. He pulled his hands out of the chest cavity with a wet, sucking pop. Okay, I don't know who's going to get this reference, but there's an episode of Rick and Morty where people in an alternate universe, their insides turn to spaghetti whenever they take the easy way out. This is sounding just like it. So, I don't know, maybe this janitor's just eating some really good spaghetti. Held tightly in his long, blood-soaked fingers was a dark, heavy mass of tissue. It was her liver. The janitor raised the large, dark organ to his face. He opened his mouth. In the dim light, I saw that his jaw seemed to unhinge, dropping lower than humanly possible. His teeth were sharp, jagged, and completely black. He bit deeply into the raw tissue. The sound of his chewing was wet and loud in the quiet, echoing the room. He swallowed a large piece whole, his throat bludgeoning unnaturally, and then took another massive bite. I felt a violent wave of nausea hit my stomach. I clamped my hand tightly over my mouth to stop myself from gagging. My brain was screaming in panic. I stepped backward, pulling away from the doorframe, desperate to run back down the hallway and find a way out of the basement. I was completely terrified. As I moved my foot backward, my heel caught the edge of a heavy, plastic biohazard bin sitting against the wall. The bin tipped over. It hit the tile floor with a loud, hollow crash, spilling plastic gloves and empty syringes across the corridor. The sound was deafening in the silence. The wet chewing in the cold room stopped instantly. I froze. I didn't breathe. I stared at the open gap in the doorway. A heavy, low growl vibrated from the cold room. It didn't sound human. It sounded like the noise a large predator makes deep in its chest when it is disturbed at a kill. "Who's there?" the deep, scraping voice asked. I didn't answer. I turned and ran. I abandoned all caution. I sprinted down the dark hallway, my shoes slipping slightly on the polished tiles. I ran past the reception desk, heading blindly toward the back stairwell that led up to the emergency exit. Behind me, I heard the heavy metal door of the cold room smash violently open, slamming against the concrete wall. Then came the footsteps. They were heavy, incredibly fast, and accompanied by the sound of long fingernails clicking rapidly against the floor tiles. He was moving with terrifying speed. I reached the end of the main corridor and turned sharply into the autopsy suite. I thought I could cut through the examination rooms and reach the service elevator in the back. I pushed through the swinging double doors, plunging into the dark, stainless steel room. I scrambled behind a large examination table, crouching low to the ground. I held my breath, pressing my back against the cold metal cabinet. The swinging doors burst open behind me. The janitor stepped into the autopsy suite. The dim ambient light from the hallway caught his figure. He was covered in dark blood from his chest to his chin. He was breathing heavily, the air whistling through his jagged teeth. I watched him from under the table. His posture was completely different. He stood tall, his limbs appearing too long for his body. His fingers dragged against the sides of the table as he walked slowly down the aisle. "You did not leave," he whispered. His voice echoed off the tile walls. "You broke the rule. I told you the work was done." I pressed my hands against my mouth, tears of pure terror stinging my eyes. I was trapped. The only exit to the room was behind him. He walked slowly past the table I was hiding behind. He didn't look down. He continued toward the back of the room. I thought I had a chance. If he moved far enough away, I could slip out from under the table and sprint for the swinging doors. I waited until his back was fully turned to me, the sound of his footsteps moving away. I shifted my weight on my knees, preparing to crawl. Suddenly, a massive, blood-soaked hand dropped down from above the table and clamped violently onto my shoulder. I screamed. He ripped me upward, lifting my entire body weight effortlessly with one hand. He threw me across the room, sending stainless steel tools crashing to the floor, and collapsed onto my back. The breath was knocked out of me completely. I looked up, gasping for air. The janitor was standing over me. His face was a mask of cold, predatory anger. His dark eyes were solid black, lacking any white sclera. Blood dripped steadily from his chin onto my medical scrubs. I scrambled backward on the floor, kicking my legs away from him, my back hitting the solid concrete wall. I had nowhere left to run. "Please," I choked out, raising my hands defensively. "Please don't kill me. I won't say anything, I swear." He looked down at me, his jagged black teeth exposed. The heavy, rotting smell of raw meat and old blood washed over me, making my stomach heave. He crouched down, bringing his face inches away from mine. "Do you know what I am, doctor?" he asked. His voice was no longer a growl, but a calm, raspy whisper. I shook my head frantically, completely paralyzed by fear. "I am a ghoul," he stated simply. "I consume the flesh of the dead. It's my nature. It's how I sustain myself." I stared at him, my mind unable to fully accept the impossible reality of the creature crouching in front of me. "I have lived in the dark spaces of humanity for a very long time," he continued, his black eyes unblinking. "For centuries, my kind dug in the dirt, breaking open wooden boxes, hunting in the mud and the rot. It was difficult, dangerous, and humans have always hunted us when they catch us." He reached out and grabbed the collar of my shirt, pulling me slightly closer. "But the world changed," he said. "Humans became organized. You built places like this, massive, cold rooms where you gather your dead and lay them out on silver platters. You made it easy." "Why?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "Why don't you just kill me?" "Because of the arrangement," he said. "I do not kill the living. Killing draws attention. It brings police, lights, and finally, hunters. I only take from the dead, specifically the liver. It's the richest organ, holding the deepest essence of your body. I take the liver, and no one notices. Your senior examiner signs the paperwork, attributes the missing tissue to decay or trauma, and the bodies go to the fire or the earth." The pieces began to click together in my terrified mind. The senior examiner knew. She knew exactly what was happening in the basement at night. That was why she was so strict about the 6 o'clock rule. She was protecting him, or protecting the hospital from him. But what about the families? I asked, desperation pushing the words out of my mouth. What do you say to them in the viewing room? How do you stop them from crying? The ghoul smiled. It was a horrific, skin-stretching grimace. That is the price of the arrangement, he whispered. A transaction. Grief is a heavy, toxic energy. It poisons the living. When I consume the essence of their dead, I create a void. I whisper the ancient words of transaction, and I pull their grief into that void. I take their pain. I swallow their agony, and I leave them with peace. He leaned back slightly, tilting his head. I eat their dead, he said softly. And in exchange, they do not have to suffer the weight of the loss. It's a fair trade. I get my meal, and your hospital gets a reputation for miraculously peaceful grieving processes. The administration ignores me. The senior doctor turns a blind eye, and I eat in peace. And now you broke the rule, he said, his voice hardening again. His grip tightened on my collar. You are a loose thread. No, I pleaded, tears streaming down my face. I am not a loose thread. I understand now. I understand the transaction. You need me to process the bodies. You need me to sign the paperwork during the day so you can eat at night. I will help you, just like the senior doctor. He stared at me for a long, agonizing minute. The dark, black eyes searched my face, looking for deception. I held his gaze, terrified, projecting every ounce of sincerity I could muster into my expression. I was begging for my life. A new arrangement, he muttered softly. He leaned in close, his cold, wet lips pressing against my ear. If you ever speak of this to the living world, he whispered, his voice vibrating directly into my skull, I will not wait for you to end up on a metal tray. I will come to your home. I will tear you open while your heart is still beating, and I will eat you whole. Do you understand? Yes, I gasped, nodding frantically. I understand, I promise. He released my shirt. He stood up slowly, the impossible height returning to his posture. He looked down at me one last time, a look of complete predatory dominance. Go home, doctor, he said, turning away. The work is done. He walked back out the swinging doors, his heavy footsteps fading down the hallway toward the cold room to finish his meal. I lay on the floor of the autopsy suite for a long time. My entire body was shaking uncontrollably. When I finally found the strength to stand, I stumbled out of the room, ran up the back stairwell, and burst out into the cold night air of the parking lot. I haven't been back to the hospital since. I called in sick for the last 3 days. But I know I have to go back tomorrow. I know if I quit, if I run away, he'll think I'm going to break the arrangement. He will think I am a loose thread. I'm writing this here because I need someone in the world to know the truth. I need this terrible secret to exist somewhere outside of my own head. Because the weight of it is crushing me. I'm a doctor. I took an oath to protect the living. And to do that, to survive, I have to feed the dead to a monster. Tomorrow morning, I will put on my scrubs. I'll walk into the morgue, and I'll nod to the old janitor with the mop. I will do what is necessary to survive, so I will never, ever stay past 6 o'clock again. This doctor better hope and pray that this ghoul does not go on Reddit. Like, dude, the janitor literally told you, if you ever go tell a soul about this, I'm going to come to your house and rip you open and eat you while you're still alive. And he gets home and he's like, takes 3 days off. He's like, all right, I got to post this on Reddit ASAP. Like, I'm going to go do exactly what he told me not to do. Anyways, that was a really good story. It's from r/horror stories, which I don't think I've ever read from, but we'll have to keep an eye on it for the future. The next story today is from r/scary stories from user RJCrane21. I bought a box of books. One of them was a woman's journal from 1953. Hey everybody, so I love to collect forgotten literature of all kinds. My house actually came with this massive built-in bookshelf when I bought it a few years ago, and it's become the home to most of my collection. Collecting these old books and things has become a bit of an obsession, but I guess it's better than crack or something. But the other day, I went to a local flea market, the best place to find whatever old relic you could possibly want, and I came across a stand that had a large cardboard box absolutely full of old books. On top was a piece of paper that said, $25 for all. I easily got the lady talked down to $15, which I was pretty proud of myself for. When I got home, I laid all the books out on my living room floor. Most of them were ones you'd expect to be in an old attic. Some farm manuals, cookbooks, a couple old church hymnals, stuff like that. But there was some other fun stuff in there. Books like Dragonwyck, The Big Clock, and Peyton Place. Some pretty neat finds if you're in the same niche hobby. But there was a journal in the box as well. It has a dark, brown leather cover. It felt kind of like an old baseball glove. The opening page has a name written in neat cursive. Ruth Calloway. And even though it may be wrong to share what this lady wrote in her journal on the internet, especially someone who has probably been dead for decades, but after reading through some of it, I think it needs to be shared. So that's what this post is for. I'll be typing out her entries exactly as they are written. I just want to share the odd things that appear in this journal. Let me know what you guys think. Alright, calling it here. This book's going to be haunted. This writer is going to die. May 3rd, 1953. This morning has been very quiet. A kind of quiet that settles over the farm once the wind decides to rest for a while. I sat at the kitchen table, looking across the fields with my coffee I had made just after sunrise. The dew that rests on the grass reflected the burnt orange sunrise beautifully. I've decided to write things down again. The house had felt horribly empty the past few months, and I thought putting words to paper might help pass the long hours. Thomas always gave me grief for keeping things bottled up inside all the time. Perhaps he was right about that, as he was with most things. I go out to his grave every morning after tending to the chickens. The ground beneath that large oak is still a bit uneven, though the grass has started growing over it some. I brush away the loose dirt that tends to gather at the headstone, and I sit with him a while. I pray and speak with him. It's strange how this place felt so full of life and now suddenly feels large and hollow. The farm is struggling a bit this season, though I suppose that's nothing new. The soil seems to do as it pleases, no matter how hard a person works it. I never was much for doing the dirty work on the farm. Still, I will keep trying. Times come that I think about leaving this place, but I don't believe I could ever truly do that. Thomas always loved this land. If I were to go, it would feel as if I left him here alone. I suppose it'll just be the two of us for a while longer. May 6, 1953. The chickens were restless today. The 8 of my hens fussed and paced more than usual as I was gathering eggs. At one point, all of them went silent as they stared out of the hen house toward the cornfield. I'm unsure if it's because of the storm that the strong winds are blowing in, or if maybe I have a slimy fox prowling around. During my visit with Thomas, I noticed the grass had grown more since the last rain. At least this land has shown it can grow something. I try to be thankful for the revelation. While I was sitting there after our prayer, I noticed the wind moving toward the far end of the field, bending the tops of the stalks back and forth. But strangely, it didn't seem to reach the house or the yard around it. I sat there suddenly aware that the air felt completely still. I remember thinking how peculiar it looked. The field swayed and danced while everything around me remained quiet. It didn't last long. After a few minutes, the wind came through the yard and everything seemed to return to normal. Perhaps living in this quiet house alone has led me to simply notice small things more than before. I suppose when someone spends too much time alone, their mind begins to wander. May 7th, 1953. The storm last night has changed everything. It rolled in just as any other storm before it. I sat at the kitchen table with only my reading lantern and a book. I've never been much for storms. Thomas always knew that and would stay close to me to keep me at ease. I sat with my book, attempting to read as the loose boards of the barn smacked violently against themselves. Storms tend to have a way of making a place feel smaller. The whole house seemed to settle around me as the wind continued to push and pull against the walls. I would close my eyes from time to time, trying to imagine Thomas' hands gripping my shoulders for comfort. It must have been sometime past midnight when I first heard it. I believed it to be the wind at first, but then it came. A small sound, thin and wavering, like crying, muffled by the storm. I sat there a moment longer, listening closely. The storm was beginning to quiet, though the rain still fell steady on the roof. Then I hear it again, crying. It was coming from outside. I took the lantern and stepped onto the porch. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle, though the air still smelled heavy and wet from the storm. Then I heard it again. There, resting beside the railing, was a bundle wrapped tightly in an old brown blanket. I can't say how long I stood there before moving. When I knelt down and pulled the blanket back, I saw the face of a newborn child staring up at me. He couldn't have been more than a few days old. As soon as I lifted him into my arms, his crying had softened, as though the warmth had comforted him. His eyes opened slowly and locked in with mine. My heart felt as if it melted completely. There were no tire tracks in the mud near the house, no footprints along the path, nothing to show how someone could have brought him here in the middle of such a storm. I stood there for a long time beneath the porch roof, listening to the rain and watching the calm begin to hit the fields after the storm. He's sleeping in a small basket near the stove while I write this. I don't know who left him here, but I can't bring myself to believe it was done by accident. May 7th, 1953. As soon as the sun rose, I grabbed the baby and made my way out to the porch to investigate. Just as I had believed last night, no footprints, no tracks. I couldn't figure out how someone would have gotten the child to the house. Am I wrong to feel unbothered by this? With there being a storm and all, I could see how it would, get rid of the tracks, Thomas and I had always wanted children. We had always dreamt of a yard full of babies. For whatever reason, the Lord must have not seen it as the right time. But now, the mysterious appearance of this child must be a sign of some kind. Tears were building in my eyes as I looked to the sky and thanked God for the immense blessing He has given me. I looked down to the sleeping baby in my arms, and the revelation hit me like nothing ever had. Samuel. My father was the one who told me the name Samuel meant that the Lord had heard someone's prayers, just as Hannah's prayers were heard in the Bible. It seemed perhaps mine have been heard as well. May 10th, 1953. Word travels quickly in a place like this. Many of the folks in town had seen Samuel and me going to the general store to get some baby supplies. Before I had even finished grabbing what I needed, Miss Pritchard and her son had spotted me near the counter. Her eyes nearly jumped from her head when she saw Samuel in my arms. She asked where he had come from. Before I could think properly, a lie about Samuel belonging to my sister in Kentucky slipped out. I said that my sister had fallen ill and she needed someone to look after the boy for a while. I don't have a sister, and lying like that made my stomach curdle. Miss Pritchard did not seem entirely convinced of my story, but she nodded and accepted all the same. Her son Todd seemed quite enamored with Samuel. His eyes were locked on him as if he was studying him. Samuel let out a small whine in my arms. Todd raised an eyebrow as he pulled on Miss Pritchard's sleeve. He talks funny. Miss Pritchard and I chuckled, and it broke the tension. By the time Sunday service began, I could feel the eyes on Samuel and me. The whispers began as soon as we entered through the doors. A widowed woman living alone does not suddenly appear with a newborn child without stirring questions. After the service had ended, a group of them gathered near the church steps, Miss Pritchard being one of them, along with old Miss Jenkins and the Williams sisters. They seemed to try their best to sound polite, though a mixture of curiosity and judgment filled their eyes. They asked about Samuel again, where he'd come from, how long he would be staying. I told them the same story. My sister, Kentucky, just until she was well again. They seemed satisfied enough with my explanation, so Samuel and I made our way to the car. As we walked, I could see Todd with a group of 4 or 5 other children. I couldn't tell what he was saying, but he was suddenly pointing his eyes in our direction. The other children would steal glances as well, some of them in awe. I looked down and could see that Samuel's eyes seemed to be glancing back at them as well. I ignored the children's glances and got Samuel and me back to the farm. May 13th, 1953. Things have really started to turn around for the better here on the farm. This morning, I went out to gather eggs from the chickens as I normally do. When I opened the door to the hen house, I nearly dropped my basket when I saw what was waiting for me. I had to count twice to be certain. 16 eggs. I find myself when I'm reading stories like this, that when is it going to get scary? What could they possibly do to make this scary? I couldn't believe it. Those hens have not produced like that since Thomas was around to tend to them properly. I stood there for a long moment, simply looking at them before gathering them into a basket. Samuel sat in the small basket I had made for him near the coop door as I worked. His quiet eyes just followed those chickens as they made their way through the yard. Afterward, I went to tend to the garden behind the house. The beans have begun sprouting far quicker than I had expected. The rows that seemed weak and on the verge of dying only a few days ago now appeared strong and bright green. Even the soil felt softer as I weeded the area around them. I even noticed that Mr. Jenkins' cornfield across the yard seemed to be fuller than I remember. Thomas used to tell me how the land can always surprise you when you least expect it. I took Samuel with me as I walked along the edge of the flourishing cornfield. The joy in my heart felt almost too great to contain. For a moment, I thought I had heard something in the field, something moving deeper in the rows as I ran my hands over the sharp leaves. Samuel grew very quiet in my arms, and I noticed his eyes were fixed deep into the rows of corn as well. But as I looked, I couldn't see anything. Just the wind and the corn. But all the same, my motherly instincts are beginning to settle in, because I brought Samuel back inside after catching Thomas up on the good news. I suppose it may be a foolish thought, but I cannot help but feel like there's something good that has come to this land. The farm just feels fuller somehow, as if the land has finally been able to breathe again. And it all seems to have stemmed from the enormous blessing that has been the presence of Samuel. May 18th, 1953. The farm's good fortune has continued these past few days. The hens have yet to slow their egg laying, and the garden has grown strong enough that I only needed to spend time keeping ahead of the weeds. Even the weeds seem to be thinning out more and more. Samuel has taken well to the fresh air. We've been going out in the evenings to check the rows one last time before sunset. The corn has now grown tall enough that the wind makes the stalks dance like long rolling waves. The sound even reminds me of the ocean Thomas had told me about after one of his trips down south. I stood there for a while watching the field wave in the wind. That's when I noticed the scarecrow. It stood far enough out that I couldn't make out many details. At first, I assumed that the farmer must have placed it out there to fend off any birds coming for his crops. I don't remember seeing it before, but there's been enough going on that I easily could have missed it. Still, something seemed strange. The wind blew heavily through the field, sending the corn swaying back and forth, yet the scarecrow did not seem to move. Not even a little. Eventually, the wind changed and the corn shifted enough that I couldn't see the scarecrow clearly from where I was standing. When I brought Samuel back into the house, I couldn't help but glance back to the field once more. For a brief moment, I could have sworn the scarecrow seemed a row or two closer, but with the dimming sunlight, I couldn't be certain. May 21st, 1953. The farm is still flourishing. The farm is flourishing too well, actually. I pulled 30 eggs from the chicken coop this morning. 30. 8 hens. It's not the worst thing, because it seems the folks around town are going through dry spells with their flocks, so I've been able to provide some eggs by setting them at the end of the drive, but it's not just their chickens. Everyone's gardens seem to have died off or are barely hanging to life, while mine, as well as Mr. Jenkins' attached field, is growing out of control. I've already been able to harvest many of my vegetables, and they've somehow started showing blossoms once again. I'm grateful for the blessings God has given me, but my prayers have turned to questions on why only me. All while the rest of the town is struggling. I believe this stress has grabbed a strong hold on me, because that scarecrow seems to have moved a few rows closer to the house. I don't know why Mr. Jenkins would move it only a few rows. I wouldn't think that would make much of a difference. May 24th, 1953. Miss Pritchard stopped me after the church service again. She was asking me about what I'm doing to my garden and what I'm feeding my chickens. She was not asking curiously. She seemed to be asking in animosity. I wish I could have given her more of my attention, but I couldn't help but notice her son Todd. He was hiding behind Miss Pritchard, holding tightly to her dress. His eyes that used to look at Samuel with curiosity or even infatuation are now showing fear and unease. I look down to Samuel and his eyes are locked onto Todd. I thanked Miss Pritchard for her time and Samuel and I made our way to the car. On the way, I saw Mr. Jenkins. He chuckled as I approached, and he joked about how we were the only ones in town who seemed to know how to grow a sprout around here. I played along, knowing I came to ask him about something very specific. The scarecrow. Mr. Jenkins says he never put up a scarecrow. Once Samuel and I arrived back at the farm, the scarecrow wasn't in the field anymore. May 26th, 1953. This morning, I brought Samuel to the porch so I could drink my coffee. As soon as we stepped outside, I noticed there was a line of flattened grass near the porch. When I went to investigate, I came to the realization that the line made a perfect circle around the house. It was as if something had been walking around the house the night before. As I was inspecting the path, I heard Samuel in his basket on the porch. He was looking towards the cornfield, smiling, laughing. I turned to face the field, and the scarecrow was back in the field. Closer. It was standing maybe a dozen rows away from the yard. I could see the shape more clearly now. It resembled a man in the broadest sense, but the proportions were wrong. It was tall and thin, almost stick-like. Okay, there we go. Its arms hanging low enough that they nearly brushed the top of the corn. Its joints seemed like they would bend in different directions, but in multiple places like a twig. The wind blew the stalks, and yet the figure remained unchanged. I realized being this close that the corn wasn't even touching the figure. It was as if the corn was bent away slightly, trying to give it space. What I had previously assumed to be clothing seems to be strips of something dark, somehow clinging to its frame. I tried to make out a face, but its head was tilted in such a way that I could not see one clearly. I stared at it, trying to figure out what strange material it had been made from. None came to mind. I started looking for the post beneath it, a wooden beam a scarecrow ought to be strung up on, but the longer I stared, the more certain I became that there was no post at all. Samuel and I have yet to go back outside. May 27th, 1953. I did not sleep well last night. I stayed up far too late washing dishes that had already been cleaned and sweeping the floor 3 times over. I kept thinking that if I stepped back outside to investigate, I could possibly find some sort of explanation. But the thought of going anywhere near that thing caused my stomach to tighten into a knot. As the evening went on, I tried to settle Samuel down for the night. The poor boy seemed restless. I'm sure the anxiety flowing through me didn't sit right for him either. The sun had almost disappeared behind the cornfield when I built up the courage to take a look outside. You couldn't have done it in the morning? The figure was still there. It did not appear that it had moved at all since the last time I saw it. I stood there for several minutes, watching through the window. That's when Samuel began to fuss in his basket. It wasn't a cry, but almost a low humming noise. I nearly dropped the curtain when I noticed the figure beginning to move. It didn't walk like another human would. Instead, it folded itself forward through the corn, slow and deliberate, as if a folding ladder were alive and moving through the corn. First, it leaned its long torso too far forward. Then one of its legs bent at an odd angle, and suddenly the rest of its body was several rows closer. It folded again and again. Once it got just inside of the yard, it stopped, now disturbingly still. It seems to be almost 10 feet tall. I couldn't see its face at first. That was until the long curve of its neck leaned in closer. Its face was missing any discernible features. It had indents of eyes, a nose, and mouth. But there were no details, as if someone had begun forming a face from clay but was not able to finish. Samuel began giggling and cooing in his basket. The figure stopped moving as soon as the laughing began. Suddenly, the figure lowered itself. Slowly, its long limbs folded beneath it until it rested on the ground. It stayed there for several minutes, completely still, almost as if it was kneeling. It was close enough now that I could see that its skin was gray and smooth, almost like rubber stretched around something underneath. And it had these black, thin, leathery strands hanging off of it, rustling softly with the wind. Samuel eventually grew quiet and fell asleep. When I turned back to the figure, it had resumed standing. It didn't seem to be interested in coming any closer. It was as if it was waiting. I wrapped Samuel in my arms and we sat together in Thomas' television chair. I had not sat in that chair since Thomas passed. I just sat there and held Samuel, trying to remain calm until morning. When morning came, I looked back out the window. The same figure was in its place, but behind it, scattered through the corn, stood dozens more of the figures, all facing the house. They all looked very similar to the original, yet they had their own unique qualities. Whether it was different places or directions, their limbs bent. Some had more or less of the leathery strands flowing in the wind. The view is both mesmerizing and terrifying. May 29th, 1953. None of them have moved, at least as far as I can tell. Samuel and I had a different group of visitors today. This morning, the yard began to fill with some of the vehicles from town, cars and trucks pulling in with purpose. Miss Pritchard, a few other farmers, and even Sheriff Jed. They gathered near the porch, yelling and screaming about how I must have poisoned their fields, or am doing something illegal to my garden in order for it to flourish the way it has. I did not dare to step outside, but I looked across the house to see if the figure was still standing in the yard. The mob of people must have noticed my glance, and they followed suit. When they saw the figure, I had a feeling of relief come across me, because that means I have not lost my mind, but also a feeling of fear grew inside my gut. Sheriff Jed took the lead as the group of them stepped to the corner of the house for a better view. Their whispers and questions were not loud enough for me to make out, but the gasps when the figure took a slow folding step were discernible. The sheriff quickly raised his gun and fired a single shot at the figure. It didn't flinch, though the sound of the gun made Samuel begin to cry. Suddenly, the figure folded forward rapidly across the yard, covering distance much faster than before. The crowd scattered to the cars and began speeding out to get away, but the figure was able to catch one of the farmer's trucks before he made it off the property. Its long, scrawny arm wrapped underneath and all the way around the cab of the truck. The metal collapsed with an awful grinding sound until the entire cab looked like nothing but a crushed tin can. Even through the scene before me, I realized that Samuel had stopped crying. The figure placed the destroyed truck down and in its originally deliberate pace, folded its way back to its place in the yard. Once it settled in its desired location, I saw something else. The rest of the figures in the field began to fold closer to the house until they were all at the edge of the corn. May 31st, 1953. The townfolk have not returned. The road out in front of the farm has remained empty as well, but I know that word has to have spread fast about what happened here. The farmer's truck remains in the yard where the figure had crushed it. The figures have not left either. They stand at the edge of the corn, sun up to sundown. I counted 37 of them at sunset. By the time the sun came up again, there were more. They have not wandered, they have not spoke. They simply faced the house, watching. Samuel slept for most of yesterday. He had been strangely calm the last couple of days. Once he woke this morning, I carried him to the window so he could feel some of the afternoon sun. The moment he looked to the field, the figures began to move. Not toward the house, downward. One by one, they fell into that kneeling pose that the first one performed a few days ago. Samuel let out a joyful laugh at the sight before us. I should have been frightened by the disturbing nature of so many of those things kneeling in the field, but instead I felt something else. Relief. Almost as if I was beginning to understand what they are. At the very least, understand that they have not come to harm my sweet Samuel. Just after sunset, I could hear movement outside. When I looked out the window, I saw that several of the figures had moved closer throughout the yard. Almost all of them are out of the field now. A few by the barn, one by the oak tree where Thomas' grave lies, and the first figure stands outside Samuel's window. Samuel was laying in his crib looking out at them, reaching for the glass, laughing. I do not believe that these figures have come for the farm, or the land, or even me. I believe they came here for Samuel, possibly even sent by God. But tonight, for the first time, I think I understand something else. They haven't gathered here to take Samuel. They're waiting. That's the final journal entry. There's nothing else after May 31st. No explanation as to what happened to Ruth or Samuel. I tried doing a Google search on them, but I really couldn't find much other than a farmhouse fire in the early 60s outside of town. One other thing I noticed when I finished reading, the back pages have impressions on them, as if someone had written on one of the pages extremely hard. I couldn't quite make them out at first, but I think I figured it out. It looks like someone wrote the same sentence over and over again. They are still here. This one really leaves the ending up to imagination. The way that all the figures kneeled to Samuel like he was their leader. Like, what are they waiting on? King Samuel, leader of the Slendermen of the Corn. The next story today is from r/no sleep from user accomplished low 7889. I found the perfect apartment in the city. Something in it is stealing my life. Oh my gosh. Everyone's always looking for that perfect place. Big enough, not too expensive, close to work. Somehow I actually found it. The building itself was old, the kind with narrow hallways and a slow elevator that always made a faint noise on the way up. But it was well kept, clean and quiet in a way that's hard to find in a city like this. The landlady lived in the same building, 3 floors above me. She was a tall, older woman with a soft voice and tight shoulders, and seemed genuinely pleased to show me the apartment. It had 2 bedrooms, a big living room, and 1 balcony. It was also just a few blocks from the office, which meant I could walk to work every morning instead of dealing with packed trains. I walked through each room expecting there to be a catch. I had just graduated and still had student loans to deal with, so there was no way I should be able to afford something like that. But when she told me the rent, I just stood there for a second. She explained she gives a big discount to young women who are new to the city because she had been one herself once, and I didn't question it. I signed the lease the same day. Moving in felt good. My dad helped me bring stuff over and fix a few small things, and for the first time, it felt like I was actually starting my life. The only strange thing that first night was when I dropped the toolbox on my foot and cut the side of my big toe pretty badly. I cleaned it, put a bandage on it, and figured I'd take a better look the next day. But when I woke up, the cut was already gone, like it had happened a long time ago. The first month felt perfect. I used to sit on the balcony every morning, eating scrambled eggs and drinking coffee before walking to work. I was in my early 20s, living in the biggest city I'd ever seen, with a job I actually liked. And it felt like everything had finally worked out. The apartment was a big part of that. The first time something felt off was after a night out drinking with coworkers. I got home, opened Instagram, and saw a picture of myself from earlier that night, and I looked different. Nothing obvious, just older. My face looked a little more tired, my skin dull, with faint dark circles under my eyes. I even pulled up older photos to compare. Same angle, same smile, but it didn't look like the same person. I didn't think much of it at first, but over the next week, it got harder to ignore. My skin got drier. I started waking up exhausted, no matter how much I slept. And one morning at work, I couldn't stop yawning during a meeting. Later that day, during a presentation, I felt this weird pain in my back. At first, I thought it was just stress. My first real job, new city, new routine, it made sense. I went to a doctor just to be safe, and he confirmed it was probably fatigue, so I kept going. Day after day, I started getting used to feeling like that. I went out less, stopped going to the gym, and most nights I just stayed in watching random shows. Every month, I'd slide the rent under the landlady's door like we agreed. I almost never saw her after the first week, and she never reached out. About 2 months after moving in, I found my first gray hair. It was a Sunday morning, and I was brushing my hair while listening to some podcast when I saw it. It honestly freaked me out. After that, things got worse fast. My coworkers started noticing. My face looked thinner, my skin dry and lifeless, and I must have lost over 20 pounds without even trying. The gray hairs kept multiplying. My boss even called me into his office and asked if everything was okay, if I needed some time off. I didn't even know what to tell him. Every doctor I'd seen kept saying the same thing. Stress, burnout, something like that. But the truth was, I wasn't even working that hard. Then Thanksgiving came up, and I decided to visit my parents back home because I couldn't wait to get out of that city. I kept thinking maybe I just needed that break. And for one day, I believed that was it. The first night back in my old room, my skin already looked better. I had energy again, and I felt like myself. But my parents didn't see it that way. They looked at me like they were seeing a different person, like they didn't recognize me anymore. And the worst part came when I stood next to my mom in the bathroom mirror. We looked the same age. That's when I knew it wasn't just stress. I ended up staying there for 2 weeks, and when I went back to the apartment, I already knew something in that place had changed me for good. The second I walked in, I started packing. I grabbed everything I could, threw it into 2 suitcases, and rushed to the elevator. There was another woman inside. A woman tall, athletic, wearing workout clothes and sunglasses, even indoors. She looked like she was in her early 20s. Ooh, that's the old landlord lady. I barely paid attention to her at first. Then I looked again. Something about her felt familiar. The way she walked, the way she kept her shoulders tight, the shape of her face. I kept staring, trying to place it. And then it hit me. She looked exactly like the landlady, only decades younger. I stared at her longer than I should have, and she noticed. She turned away quickly and tried to step out as soon as the elevator reached the ground floor, but I didn't let her. I grabbed her arm and turned her toward me. I didn't need her to say anything. I already knew. It was the landlady. I started yelling at her, asking what she had done to me. She tried to pull away, but I wouldn't let go, and we ended up fighting right there in the lobby. Of course, she was now much stronger than me. Much, much stronger. And she shoved me hard enough that I fell and hit the back of my head on the floor. I don't remember losing consciousness. It just felt like everything cut out. When I woke up, I was in a hospital room, with bright lights and nurses moving around at bedside, and the landlady sitting next to my bed. She looked guilty, almost sad. She apologized for pushing me and said she didn't have a choice, but I didn't care about that. I just wanted answers. Through tears, she told me the same thing had happened to her, that she had moved into that apartment about a year ago, and that there had been another landlady before her. I processed that information for a minute, then asked how the hell that worked, and she said she didn't know exactly. What the last landlady told her was only that the 2 apartments, hers and the one she rented out, had been connected since the building was constructed, and that one drains time while the other gives it, like a straw. I know how insane that sounds, because my first instinct was to call it a lie. But she stood up, wiped her eyes, and put a key in my hand, telling me that both apartments were mine now and that she was moving out. I asked her what I was supposed to do with it. She gave me a small, tired smile and told me to rent it out. I thought about going to the police. I thought about trying to find the landlady. I thought about going back to my parents, but none of that would give those months back, or the years. I'm 22, but my body is decades older, and every time I look in the mirror, I can tell it won't just reverse on its own. In desperation, I listed my apartment on the same website where I found it and moved to hers. The messages started coming in almost immediately. The first showing is today. That's why I'm writing this, out of guilt. One part of me keeps saying, I don't have to do this, but there has to be another way. But the other part that screams that I don't have a choice, that it's either this or accepting that I've lost all my youth. The girl coming to see the place sounded young and hopeful on the phone. She's excited to find a spot where she can have the best time of her life in this city. I remember sounding just like that. Okay, hear me out. Rent the apartment out on Airbnb. I know it sounds crazy, but listen. Instead of stealing a bunch of life from one person and making them old, you just take a little bit of life from I don't know, 20 or 30 people. They won't even notice because they might have had a day or 2 taken off their life, and you get young again, and you can just stay there and stay young forever if that's something you really want to do. I know, problem solved, guys. I'm here all week. Anyways, that's all the scary Reddit stories and Minecraft I have for you today. If you liked the video, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe. We're about to hit 10,000 subs, which is insane to me. I love reading these stories for you guys, and I'm so happy that you guys tune in to listen. Also, we have a Discord server. If you want to join, it's going to be one of the top links in the description. I'm going to be holding some events in there here soon. So yeah, join if you want to join the fun. Thanks for watching. Peace.